Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us today. And of course, thank you to Cradle community for writing this indispensable and incredible resource for those curious about the prison abolition movement here in the UK. And thank you also very much for putting so much love and effort into organizing this incredible event and helping out a very exhausted team. My name is Brechna, and Farhana right by my side, and I are the founders of Hajar Press, a new independent and proudly political publishing house run by and for people of color. Thank you. So by political press, we mean that we're absolutely not neutral and that Hajar takes a clear position on racial capitalism, on Palestine, on abolition. When we were both setting up this publishing project, it wasn't very difficult to articulate what we wanted the press to be because there was so clearly a need for it. There's a line that we use a lot when describing Hajar's work, that there's no either or between the beautiful and the revolutionary. We think that really captures our list and the gorgeous body of work that we're trying to put out in the world. Cradle's book holds a very important place on our list because when Cradle say that revolution is an emergency, that we must move forward with clear intention and vigilance. What that means is changing everything as we know it, not only because things are so deeply terrible at the moment, but because we should fight for a world in which, in Cradle's words, a world full of love, health, education, food, shared abundance, dignity, safety, justice, and freedom. Thank you. Thank you again, Cradle, for trusting us with your work. Thank you all for attending this event. I'll now pass over to Farhana to say, to say a bit about the book itself.
Oh, don't stop for him.
Okay. Hi, thanks everyone for coming. I'm just going to read a bit from the book's description to frame some of the ideas that Cradle have brought together in this incredible book. Am I doing okay with the mic? Yeah? Okay. The fight for prison abolition is a struggle for collective liberation, a transformative vision of a safer world in which communities live free from exploitation on a thriving planet. Drawing connections across social justice movements with a shared abolitionist ethic, this revolutionary book illuminates how harmful ideas of criminality and punishment can manifest in many ways beyond the prison industrial complex. This work is a collaboration with friends, mentors, and giants fighting for housing justice, food justice, climate justice, migrant justice, justice for survivors of violence, and more. With this insightful and generous book, Cradle Community invites us to explore what it will take to dismantle structures of oppression and to imagine the future we can rebuild together, brick by brick. Just a little bit about Cradle as well. Cradle is a collective of organizers committed to radical education and building understanding of prison abolition and transformative justice. Brick by Brick is our first book. So yeah, those are the introductions, and I will now just pass over to Cradle. We wanted to kind of start at the beginning with the book's introduction, which is incredibly powerful and inspiring. And I wanted to ask if each of you could read a couple of lines that are particularly meaningful to you personally from the introduction. Who should I give the mic to first?
Thank you. Oh, okay. So we're not the first to explore these issues or write about these issues or talk about these issues. So we thought it would be good to start with gratitude and like naming some of the people who have been doing this work, because we're not reinventing the wheel. So this is taken from the introduction, which is called Our Foundations, Our Co-Conspirators and Our Guides. And we say, we write in gratitude to the work of so many others, including Fred Moten, Mariam Kaba, Beth Ritchie, Ruth Wilson Gilmore, Dorothy Roberts, Leah Lakshmi, Pienza Samarashina, Mimi Kim, Olive Morris, Generation 5, Insight, Survived and Punished, Paul Karate, and Navigate, Bryony Benyon, and the many anonymous transformative justice practitioners who do amazing work and have been building alternatives to prison and punishment for years. We are grateful for all of our friends, chosen family, and co-conspirators who have had those late night chats with us about safety and freedom. We write with thanks to the great voices of the Black feminist tradition, including Stella Dadzi, Professor Diana Patton, Bell Hooks, and Audre Lorde, who have helped us reimagine anti-violence work, to Angela Davis and Critical Resistance, who gave us language for prison abolition. Of course, to Assata Shakur and her fight for socialism and Black revolution, to the Combahee River Collective for their contributions on identity politics and the practice of radical solidarity, to A. Sivanandan and Daye and Walter Rodney for their teachings on international solidarity, and to all the communities around the world united in resistance against colonialism. Lastly, we thank our wonderful editors and publishers, Farhana Arafin and Brekna Aftab, who have supported us in putting together this book with positivity and grace. Thank you so much for believing in this project.
From the introduction. The truth about the prison industrial complex is that its current structures, prisons, detention centers, borders, are pretty new social institutions in human history. They have not always existed, and they will not always exist. But as with every resilient structure for authoritarian control, in the centuries since it first developed, the so-called criminal justice system has evolved and undergone numerous reforms around the world. We reject the notion that reforms, which always serve to strengthen the prison industrial complex, can deliver justice, since we believe that keeping human beings in cages is not just. We know, both from experience and statistical data, that punishment does not work to provide safety or deter harmful behavior. And we know that this is not a failure of the system, but a product of its design.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, that was helpful. Our collective is dedicated to building radical spaces, building our expertise in intervening in and de-escalating violence, building frameworks to reimagine how we understand health and well-being, building strong bases of support and care for survivors, and building new approaches to accountability in our work with people who have caused serious harm. Although we have all brought our individual experiences to the creation of this book, we have written this as a collective in acknowledgement that individual acclaim is counter to our message, and because none of us could do this alone.
Yes, Abolition asks for more than just demolition of buildings. They ask for the complete dismantling of the world as we know it and the building of a whole new one, which will offer such an abundance of care that there'll be no space in our minds and in our communities for things like prisons. This work is an experiment in connecting the dots, an exploration of how we can honor centuries of resistance and respond to the new challenges of our generation. We reject the myth that imprisonment, surveillance, and control keep us safe or solve social and economic problems. Abolition is the work of creating a world full of love. Abolition is work creating a world full of love, health, education, food, shared abundance, dignity, safety, justice, and freedom. To realize this world, we must tear down, transform, and rebuild the very bricks of our lives.
And right at the end of the book, the section on joy and healing. We can't get through this alone. Our community is not just for support. It's who makes us laugh, who shares meals with us, who dances with us around the living room. The joy of being yourself, tasting freedom with your chosen family in a safe space, listening to music and creating art, dancing and practicing movement work in order to free our bodies and minds. Eating good food in comfortable places and dreaming together are all part of our revolutionary work. Our politics and this book would never have come to be if not for the joy of these revolutionary friendships.
Thank you all for those powerful words. Abolition requires that we change one thing, which is everything. Abolition is not absence, it is presence. What the world will become already exists in fragments and pieces, experiments and possibilities. We love this quote from Ruth Wilson Gilmore and think that your book really captures the gravity of these words. Brick by Brick makes a case for abolition by weaving together a huge range of struggles, from border abolition to dismantling patriarchy, to climate change, to food justice, and so much more. I wondered if you could say a bit about how abolitionist organizing serves as a window into these other struggles, and how understanding these connections among these different movements can help us imagine new worlds. Why is experimentation so crucial to this work? Who wants to take that?
Yeah. Thanks so much for this question. Abolition is a freedom dream. It's my way of describing what it is, because similarly to like peace, it's a goal that we're all reaching for, and it's something that unites us. And so abolition is a long-term goal that unites us across movements, because without practicing hope as a discipline, as Mariam Makabe really encourages us to do, we lose sight of, the possibility. And I think what is missing a lot of times in our various movements that are siloed is that we get so caught up in the tearing down of the environmental system, of climate change, and the tearing down of patriarchy, and the tearing down of white supremacy, that we don't have space, room, energy, love, joy, capacity left for the building. And so abolition reaches across every movement, that everything we're fighting against, and says, this is what we're fighting for.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of follows on from the last question, but one thing that we think that the book does really brilliantly is lay out the context of so many of the oppressive systems that structure our society, and then highlight how abolitionist organizers are already working to resist these and build new systems of support and care. So yeah, as Brecna mentioned, you talk about all kinds of aspects of society, from housing to education to food to health to the gender binary to ableism and gendered violence. And you show the way that the punitive logic of the state seeps into all of these spheres. But the flip side of that is that abolitionist ethics and visions of justice and care can offer us ways to dismantle all of them at the same time. So could you talk a bit maybe about how about some of the ways that carcerality and punishment are embedded in so much of how society is run, and then about the alternatives that abolition can offer? It's a big question, but who's going to take it?
Yeah, so this is something that we think is really important to recognize about abolitionist work. We know that everything within our society is kind of built around the sort of ideas that we're brought up with as children. So we're brought up to believe that there is a good person and there's a bad person. There's goodies and baddies, heroes and villains. And the only way that that children can kind of see themselves is as the goodies, as the people who never do any wrong, never make any mistakes. And when we actually find ourselves teaching children that message, we just reinforce the idea that you can't own up to the mistakes that you make. And that's the case, and that kind of happens within such a like wide range of society. So we see this everywhere from yeah, I don't know, I'm stuck now. So yeah, just like from school and how we punish our kids. So, you know, instead of explaining to children like how their behavior is affecting other people, and instead of encouraging them to make amends, we're sending them to the naughty corner and not explaining why even. And that doesn't give children the skills to be able to navigate conflicts, to be able to navigate like accidentally hurting someone else. And without those skills, we're not actually going to be able to reflect on the harm that we are doing to other people and change our behavior. And instead, we're just going to keep trying to avoid being seen as the baddie and avoid accountability for the harm that we've done.
Thank you so much, Jess. I totally agree with that point, especially about how it sets us up for the rest of our lives. Because you know, we live in a criminal justice system that wants you to plead innocent, you know, and it's always goodies and baddies. We're repeating that. No, I'm a good guy. I would never do something like that. What do you mean? I'm an ally. I would never say something like that, right? We're always trying to paint ourselves as a good person. But abolition is so exciting, just to get to the second part of your question, about what it offers us, because it offers an alternative to a one-size-fits-all solution, which is what the criminal justice system offers us. And so the way that we respond to harm, the way that we respond to conflict, the way that we respond to what we can really do to other people, which is like really fucked up, terrible things, how we respond to that is how we transform the world. And that's what abolition asks us to do. It's a lot harder than just throwing someone away and locking away the key, but that doesn't work now. So maybe we should start not just with our young people, but with all of us learning that accountability for how to react when we have caused harm. And that's the starting place that abolition asks us to go.
Thanks so much, Becky. We also wanted to ask you a question about care, since it's so central to abolitionist politics and also to your collective, to Cradle. So yeah, there are so many ways that the state presents the way that it kind of enacts abuse and violence over us, as stemming from care or as stemming from, you know, our need for protection. And the people who are most in need of care are also those who are most harmed by the state, and they're the most vulnerable to incarceration. And then at the same time, services that are supposed to provide everybody in our society with care, such as the health service, are highly carceral. They primarily provide kind of individualized reactive solutions to problems, and also they're embedded within the state's surveillance apparatus and border regime. So yeah, could you talk a bit about that kind of co-option of care by the state and about what care could look like in an abolitionist world?
Thank you. Yeah, we talk a lot about what care is and what care is not in the book, really, and like the things that create an illusion of care and an illusion of safety, but that are in fact sort of, yeah, create the opposite for marginalized communities. And it's not that these systems aren't keeping some people safe, right? But it's usually people who are not actually like necessarily at risk of violence. Like what they're afraid of is like losing power and things. And it's kind of what is doing is like keeping that intact, right? And so I guess like understanding that so many of these institutions, they didn't start off being about care, and a lot of them have kind of gone into like a rebrand. Like prisons were never about safety. That's not what they were originally for. They were about policing, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I think, in a minute, but like they were about policing people in the colonies, right? It was about criminalizing people who had formerly been enslaved. It was always about controlling marginalized communities and enforcing that marginalization. And then sort of with the rise of like the kind of more liberal feminist movement, there's sort of been a narrative that prisons and police, you know, that they're there for the safety, particularly of women, right? This idea that it's women that need to be safe, kept safe by these institutions. And what abolition provides for us, and like where abolition comes from, is from those communities that found that they were both at risk of violence in their homes and in their communities from people who were close to them and people that they lived with and things like that. But they were also at risk of violence if they went to the police, or they were also their loved ones were being brutalized by the police, or their loved ones were being incarcerated for minor things that were just a sign of them living in poverty and these kinds of things. And they were seeing the violence that those institutions were causing to their communities and realized like, well, we're not going to look for solutions through that system, right? And so we see that sort of narrative kind of being propelled through legal frameworks and through new bills and through prison reform, like all the time. So for example, like concrete examples of this would be like the community custody units that they're trying to build for people on the women's prison estate, right? Where they are women's prisons, but they're calling them community custody units because we've learned that it's bad to put women in prison. So instead of putting them in prison, we'll just rename the building, but we'll still criminalize them, we'll still remove them from their communities, or maybe we'll let their babies come into prison with them, which would be nice for some reason. And so rather than questioning like why, if these are vulnerable people, why are they ending up criminalized, right? Why would they be needing to go into a community custody unit in order to access care? Why is that care not provided in the community? Why are they not safe in their communities? Why are they not being able to access the support they need without being criminalized, right? And so when we see these reformed prisons, when we see these secure schools, right? The new children's prisons, right? They call them secure schools. When we see legislation like Prevent and all these things that are supposedly about safety, but actually like reinforce these carceral logics, these ideas of punishment, and don't change the amount that people are criminalized. In fact, it broadens the scope for criminalization because suddenly criminalization is also the way that you access care. And so for us, like, it doesn't matter how nice the prison is or how kind the police officer is, or if you put the police officer in a different uniform and call them something else, like community safety officers, right? Like all of these things that really co-opt that language. You know, the reality of what it's doing to these communities, the fact that it's not changing the conditions that create criminalization in the first place, shows us that it's not about our care, right? And I don't know if, because I've spoken for a long time, does anyone want to speak about the abolitionist like vision of care? What that alternative is? Yeah, go on.
Just to sort of add to what Elsie was saying, thank you for that. I think where we see this sort of corruption is a lot is in the mental health system, where people are sort of locked up, and that's under the that's their care, that's for their good, and that's their safety. But we know that we can do things differently. We know that we don't have to wait until people are in a crisis and people are sort of experiencing distress before we act. We can sort of build systems like pod mapping and look at who people in our community are that we can turn to support us with our mental health, to house each other, to feed each other. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything else. Yeah.
Just a tiny point, which is when I studied criminology and I learned the amount or the proportion of children in care, meaning under the responsibility of Her Majesty's government, who then end up under the responsibility of Her Majesty's prison service. It is wild. When you go home, look up in your county the percentage of children in care who ended up in prisons in your, it will seriously make your skin crawl. The very children who's supposed to be cared for by the state is the children who end up in prison. So I just want you to look that one statistic for your local area. Don't look the whole country.
Know the statistic if that's helpful.
Oh, yes, say that shit,
Well,
please.
I just have this graphic in my mind. It's not exactly that, but it's that in the general population, 1 to 2% of children go into the care system. But in the youth prison system, 50% of the young people there have been in the care system. So that is like a hugely disproportionate thing. So
Mic drop.
Thank you all. So your work and this book focuses on the role of collectives and groups of people rather than individuals. Another quote that we love is from Naomi Murakawa's intro to Mariam Kaba's book, We Do This Till We Free Us. You should all also read. Why be a star when you can be a constellation? Which we think so aptly describes your work. Why was it crucial for Cradle to include interviews and conversations with so many people and groups of people in this book?
I think so much of our practice at Cradle has sort of come from the moments where we've had to figure out how to survive and our reflections on that, and sort of thinking about what we would do differently next time and what we could put in place to prevent the harm from reoccurring. And I think we wanted the book to be sort of a snapshot of that and to really honor the relationships we have and the friendships we have that keep us alive. And I think, you know, this was such a huge undertaking, trying to map out how the prison system shows up in all of our lives. And Abolition asks us to center the people at the margins, the people that are most intimately impacted by violence in these systems. So we had to have conversations with these people to write this book. And that extends beyond the UK border as well. You know, when these borders fall, we sort of have a responsibility to our comrades abroad, to people all over the world, to be building new alternatives that aren't just repeating the systems that we already have. Yeah, I think we wanted to sort of reject the neoliberal individualism that's sort of enforced on us, and return to community. You know, the harm and the violence that we're all experiencing, it extends beyond the individual. So, you know, it's a structure of oppression and requires entire collectives to dismantle that. And to, you know, it requires us all to choose not to call the police, and us all to intervene if we're witnessing someone being stopped and searched. You know, we all have to play our part in order to make these systems obsolete and to, you know, build new structures of freedom and care. And yeah, does anyone else want to add? Thank you.
Yeah, totally agree with that. And like, and also I think, you know, when Kelsey first brought me on board, thanks Kelsey, she kind of talked about like how important it was that the first part of the book is the kind of the bricks that we have to tear down, and the second part is the sort of new foundations that people across the UK and the world are actually building, because we don't want this to be like another book where people are like, oh no, everything's terrible, everything sucks, I can't do anything, and nothing is changing, because things really are changing. And I think
one of the really positive things that we've seen over the last couple of years has been a much bigger interest in things like mutual aid. We've seen groups like the National Food Service like really thrive and start to build, and those are kind of spaces of communal eating where people can come together, can build the sort of networks that we actually need in order to look after each other. Yeah, so those are the kinds of important like little seeds that people are planting like all across the UK, and I think this book is a really hopeful and really optimistic book.
Yeah, and I think that it's so nice the way that the book does honor so much of the kind of growing resistance that's being done right here. And that kind of ties to the next question, which is that often we hear about abolition primarily in the context of the US. And so we wondered why you think it's important for us to kind of think about and understand abolition from within the kind of UK context and within the context of the violence that's done by the British state in particular, and how that context kind of differs in some ways or some important ways from America, and how we can maybe tailor our tactics to our context while also kind of holding in mind that we're building a global movement.
Thank you. Yeah, you're so right. A lot of the language and research and work and organizing around prison and police abolition definitely comes from the United States, and like especially African American organizers have done so much to give us even the language we use, like prison industrial complex, and the framework and just the thinking power has come from that context. And often when it comes to the situation in the UK around prisons and policing, people kind of use the American context as a way to maybe distract from or minimize what's going on here. Like, oh, it's not as bad. Like for example, in the States, like police carry guns and but actually, when we look at the British context, there are two things. One, you can take into account the legacy of the British Empire, and taking into account the movement to abolish slavery as important for understanding police and prison abolition as well. So as I was saying, yeah, Britain is a country where there's a lot of denialism about the violence and the atrocities historically and currently that takes place. There's this idea that Britain is a more, same with Canada as well, more liberal, caring, progressive, takes a more progressive approach. And it's like, oh, we should be more grateful, or we should be so lucky that we're not in America, for example, when actually that is a tactic to distract from the ongoing violence and how the violence here is connected to the violence going on in the States and just the global policing system that exists right now. And you can really start to see these connections when you look into the history of the British Empire and the legacy of colonialism and imperialism when it comes to state violence in the UK. A lot of people think when we talk about even on the academic level, you think about the history of prisons and policing, often people start like in the Victorian era, when actually, if you take into account the legacy of the British Empire, the first British prisons, because we're in Jamaica, we're in Guyana, we're in you know, islands that the British had like colonized. And that was considered to be Britain at the time. That was British territory, that is Britain. And you can see like the descendants of enslaved people, colonized people are overrepresented in the institutions, those institutions today, even prisons that still exist in countries like Nigeria and in Jamaica were built by the British during the British Empire. And you see Britain deporting people, prisoners, to be imprisoned in prisons that the British built initially. So it's definitely important to look at the UK specifically, so we can understand better how the system works and how we can dismantle it and how it connects to how it fits into the bigger picture globally. And to really have these conversations about just taking into account history. Britain loves recognizing the abolition of the slave trade. I remember at school, yeah, William Wilberforce. How many times did we learn about William Wilberforce? Like, as if like, oh yeah, but who enslaved them in the first place? Like, what? It's so ridiculous, and it's a very sophisticated, like, looking in, just doing the research for the book. British, it's all state violence, right? Imperial violence, colonial violence, and it's Britain in particular is very sophisticated and subtle, and often works by using kind of proxies and other, like, maybe private forces and corporations or other territories to do its dirty work for it. So Britain can still be like, oh, we are, Pax Britannia, we're out here like trying to spread liberal peace and justice, when actually that myth is the thing that is making it so hard to even critique and dismantle the system here as well. So it's like, it's definitely important to look at the British context, for sure. Does anyone else want to add?
Okay, do you want to talk about it?
Yeah.
Well, as the resident American in the collective, when I first moved to this country, one of the most fascinating things that I experienced were British people coming up to me and telling me how sad they were about how bad things were in America. And I'm like, how do you think it got like that? You and your cousin and them came over here, you guys set this up. So the reason I say this is because to point at American prisons and say, well, we don't have as many people in prison as the Americans do, is we take what you guys do and do it times 5. Like, that's the way, you're like, oh, let's go take over parts of the world. We're like, bet, raise you one. I'ma build military bases on all of them. Let's do this. So we're just mimicking each other. Basically, America tried to be Europe and took itself to a whole nother level, and now it's even beyond Europe. But as Angelica said, all of the concepts, the whole concept of the rule of law is the basis of criminalizing people and putting them in cages. The whole rule of law that's spread around the so-called Commonwealth. And the other thing I want to say about being an American is that not only were the first prisons or first places where people were actually locked away, like you said, in Jamaica and in other colonies, but also that the first penitentiary created by a British, academic, Jeremy Bentham, the first penitentiary, he went to America to trial it, because at the time America was a more liberal place, and they thought the Americans would care about reforming the convict, whereas the British just wanted to do corporal punishment. I'll cut his hands off, tie him to a few horses, draw and quarter him, cut his insides out. That'll teach him. And Jeremy Bentham said, no, I'll go talk to the Americans. They'll believe in penance because of their commitment to Puritan and Christian ideas. They'll believe in penance. They'll believe we should lock the people away and let them work on themselves, as opposed to just locking them away so we can kill them. So the prison didn't start as a punishment. The prison was a place to hold you for your punishment. And that transition has just been a back and forth between these two nations, ping-ponging with the bodies of marginalized people. So as an American, I want to tell you that everything Americans do, we got from you.
our final question before we take some questions from you all. Revolution is an emergency. These words from the intro to your book are really quite striking. I wondered if you could say more about the urgency of abolitionist organizing and how we balance doing the everyday work necessary to maintain momentum while also taking a step back to reflect on strategies and tactics, and also being able to take a step back to have moments of joy and rest, which is also, of course, so crucial to the sustainability of this work.
We actually didn't allocate someone for this one, so
We do have some notes for it, but
Wait, I just wanted to.
I was just gonna say that like it's this constant balance really of like understanding how urgent things are, and like the more you immerse yourself and the more familiar you become with like the workings of the criminal justice system and the like horrendous things that people are going through in prison, if you're not someone who's experienced them yourself, like it's, yeah, there's like clearly an urgency and there's like so much harm that's like happening now. And so it's like this thing of like, we're like passively kind of consenting to it by not every day being like quite outraged, you know, in the same way as we like passively consent to, or like we passively like create this culture where like street harassment is really common because most people don't intervene when that happens. Most people turn a blind eye or whatever. And when we do that, we're saying like, this is I can deal with this. It's not worth me trying to change this. And so there's an urgency of like why we want this to show like how it's connected to like you wherever you are, like the abolitionist movement, like whether you're concerned with housing or mental health or education or food or gender or disability, like all of these things, like you need to be fighting for abolition within all of those like kind of causes. I don't know what to say. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Yeah, within all those issues, because like it is really, really urgent. But you know what Tope was saying earlier about like working as a collective and things, like we can't be in crisis mode all the time, and that's something that personally I've had to try and really like take in over the pandemic, right? Because like mutual aid, like some of us were involved in that, and that took off in a way that none of us were expecting when you just set up a Facebook page because you're jealous that other friends have done it, and then and then you realize, oh, there's 6,000 people who are my neighbors who right now want to like organize, and I've not done that before. Like we've had these like, and then there's been, you know, like I'm not going to go over this whole pandemic, but this last 18 months, it's been crisis after crisis, and it's been like horrendous thing after horrendous thing, while in the background all of this horrendousness is going on, right? And so to have to really like learn that, like I think like when we think that we're indispensable as individuals, like that's what drives burnout, right? And that like if we don't start to like remove these ideas of like expertise and like you have to be perfect at a thing to do it, then it will never be okay for other people to just take on the work. And what we need more than anything is just more people to take on the work, like supporting people without the support of the state like is a lot of work. And currently when we're all also tied into these other systems, having to pay rent, having to like do all these things, like it cuts down the amount of time that each person can like put into like their community. And so it just means we even need even more people so that you can like sub out and you can take those breaks, because it is so important. It is really draining, and we are all people who like individually have been having like a uniquely terrible time through this pandemic, and also have all been trying to support each other. And what's hard about it is like not having enough kind of like people who will really like show up, you know. And I totally understand why a lot of people can't, but there's something about like in that same way with bystander intervention and all these things, like there's always going to be an excuse not to, and we all need to like build those muscles of being a bit more willing to like
try to help people out, try and support people, and knowing that like you don't have to be an expert, you don't have to be like a professional to do it. You just have to have like these core principles, and with those core principles, like they will drive you and they will steer you in the right direction. And when you have your community, when you build that accountability, like I think perfectionism and all these things are really driven by like, you know, you're so afraid to make mistakes because what will happen if you do? And how is that not a carceral logic? You know, you're worried that people will abandon you, or people won't like you, or there's something else that's going to happen that's negative. When actually, like, if we can just be accountable because we know people will hold us, we know that if we make mistakes, like people will come through. Like we did that with the book, right? Like there were moments where we felt like there were things that some of us like, we'd done an interview maybe, and then actually realizing like upon like looking at an interview that someone else had done, realizing like maybe this is why you're struggling to write up this interview, because it was really tough. Maybe actually like rather than being like, oh, why aren't you doing this, maybe it's about, okay, let's like rejig this and someone else is going to write this up because that was a really intense interview that you just did and it was about your experience too, and none of us are so separate from these issues that it isn't also impacting us, right? And so just knowing how to be there for each other, knowing actually like how we like really build that community and that network. And to be honest, like it doesn't always have to be your best friends. Like it doesn't actually have to be people that you'll hang out with every weekend or whatever, as long as you can have that commitment to each other of like showing up and taking responsibility and knowing that you have those core principles involved. It doesn't have to be like people that you love. Like luckily we've been able to write this with people that I love, but it's just I don't know. And but in organizing, like you organize with all kinds of people, right? And you have to be able to do that. And in your community, like it can't just be people that you have stuff in common with. It has to be your neighbors. It has to be people beyond that. And yeah, sometimes it's going to be hard, but if you, yeah, principles.
That was beautiful.
I can't believe you did that off the cuff.
That was perfect. That was perfect. Anyway, okay, question. Oh wait, which?
Yeah, which mic are we using?
Yeah, let's try it. Does it?
Should we?
Okay, hang on.
Oh, no. Is that because it's stuck or is it just because of the ease? Stretch? Or maybe we should put that one at the, like, if someone wants to ask a question, if they came to that corner, they would be able to reach it. If people came in at the back, it might be.
Okay, give us a minute. Okay, so shall we just ask them? Yeah. Okay.
Oh, right, yeah, we don't have a very big mic. Yeah.
I think we'll just, yeah, maybe like a little sheet. I should have.
Yeah, my megaphone. No, I think that's a good shout.
Yeah, okay. So we're gonna take questions and if you could come up here, that would be really helpful.
If you can, if you're able.
And also we need the other one as well, right?
Okay.
There it is. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Hands. 1, 2. Yeah, and then I guess just come up to the front. Yeah, sorry.
This is ridiculously intense.
I know.
Oh, okay. Okay, I don't really know where to stand, but hopefully you can hear me. Oh, okay, amazing. Firstly, just want to say thank you so much. Like, this is like such an amazing resource that like for years and years to come, everyone will be like enjoying and like learning from and everything. And also just to like Hajar Press as well. I've like been reading Lola's book this week and Sarah's book this week, like during the hell that this week has been because of loads of different events, as we all know, like, and that they really just provide space to imagine and dream, and that's really special and rare. I wanted to ask about like, on the point about like hope is a discipline, like something that I think you'll all relate to and like know has been happening is like there's such a proliferation of like sharing your trauma and lived experience, whatever that means, as a condition of support, especially in lots of like charity services. And something that struck me over the years of like working with young men in prison particularly is like, how do you like encourage people who've like experienced the sharp end of the system to dream and imagine and like step into that fully? And like, I think something that I've heard really a lot doing that work is like, prison's the best thing that's happened to me. And like, a lot of people in their practice, like, will just leave it there and like, that's it. Like, let's go to a government roundtable. You can tell the government how amazing prison was. And I remember once like trying to like unpick that and like, I remember one conversation where the young man was like, I had counselling in prison and that did do a lot for me, and like I had a great counsellor and like it changed my life, and like actually understanding, well, what would have that counselling looked like in the community, right? Like, would that have been enough? Like, what else did you need? Like, what do you actually want? And like, I think that's almost like the silent, sharp, subtle, like way that prison debilitates you. And so I just wondered what you thought about that. And like, yeah, how do you encourage people to step into their imagination when they've been broken down so much? Like, yeah.
Have you all heard the saying that hope never dies? So hope as a discipline to me means that it never dies. Like the light in the very, very pit of my stomach never dies. So even if it's 99.999% dark, there's that 0.00001%, that little speck of glitter of fairy dust. That is how we keep hope alive. And I did a project in Washington, D.C. while working with formerly incarcerated youth and talking about Afrofuturism and using Afrofuturism and Black Panther or Wakanda as a jumping off place for young people to imagine what a world without white supremacy looked like. And it was so exciting to hear what the young people's visions of a world was like. And as a sci-fi nerd, to me, Star Trek and other kind of sci-fi series, a lot of times we see them as colorblind, but they're not colorblind. They're not colorblind. They're just societies. It's not that, okay, I won't go into the Trek analogies, but a Vulcan is treated as a Vulcan. A Vulcan is not treated as a human being. We don't paint with wide brushes here. But I say this to say that when we look beyond what we currently have, even if that is looking to pop culture, even if that is looking to fiction, even if that is looking to sci-fi, if it's looking to anime, that's why so many people like those genres, because it's an escape from this matrix or this thing that we live inside of as far as hope. So I feel like we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Like, we can look to creative expression and to creative ways of reinventing what our world looks like to really tap into, especially when we're in that period of 99.99% darkness and we need somebody to help us find that little speck of light.
Technical difficulties. Yeah, really echo what Chelsea just said there. Also big into Star Trek. So let me go on my 1 hour long PowerPoint presentation. No, but I think that storytelling plays such a massive part in like rebuilding our capacity to like imagine something better. And that's kind of something that we touch on as well in the book when we're talking about like what happens on TV and what happens in films. And I think it's really sad because a lot of these industries are like so gate kept by people who actually don't really want to dream about like much bigger, exciting worlds without prisons and without the police. But we do see alternatives being built through things like Hajar Press, where we're like, I'm not joking, like, yeah, like, it's through people coming together to actually give other people a platform to bring their imaginations to life. And what Hajar do is like so important, and supporting people in your communities who have access to, you know, film equipment, to, you know, if they're a poet, for instance, like making sure that they're able to share their skills and their creativity with people who are like completely ostracized and never given a chance to explore like what their ideal society would look like.
Thanks so much, Jess. Okay, next, I think we have a question here, and then there's, are you? Yeah. I think this will work.
Cheers. I don't know how this works. I'm just holding it. I guess first of all, just thank you for your work. I haven't read it, but I'm sure it will be amazing. Yeah. I've tried reading it from the pictures you've uploaded. It's not really possible. But yeah, the first was really just maybe I'm just curious about how exactly you wrote it, because collective writing processes are exactly about the undoing of the individual, right, and learning when to insist on something or let go of something, and have done that for many years in collectives, and to the point where we don't use our own names, right? And I think as a practice in this city that is extremely individualized, extremely commodified, and which leads to my other thing, that just because also hearing you say that hoping more people will step into how can we say, to trying to be, not just be brave alone, but be brave together and create more structures so that we can alleviate each other, so that too much responsibility does not just fall on the few. I see that as a Black trans femme, organizing a lot, and like how difficult it is, especially if charity sectors, NGO sectors, fashion, and hashtag activists are the ones getting the credit or all the resources, while communities' resources are divested away from them. So it's just like, how do you position all of this, like these broader things, in what you want? And like, what I want is not tea, but I want some more frustration, because I think that I will read this and I will get like from it what I need, and I know that I'm from a different positionality, perhaps as a trans woman, but also that there is you know, maybe it's through some of the we want this more, you know, and pointing out some of the toxics of this city as well, because yeah, that's just it.
Know how we I don't know. Yeah, just to start with your first question, thank you so much, about how we wrote this as a collective. Yeah, I think the fact that we are all friends and love each other was the only way we were able to do this. We were able to sort of come together, eat together, you know, house each other. We all live in different parts of the UK and London, and just, you know, honor the fact that we have neurodivergent brains, and we knew there was going to be a lot of procrastination in the process, and we wanted to try and sort of you know, center joy and make it as fun as possible, and for it to be not seem like sort of homework or like this like huge task that we've got to complete to a deadline.
Yeah. It was hard, yeah. That was
Still not one of them.
when we say there were a few times when we were gonna give up. We just thought, no, genuinely, we thought it just wasn't happening. It wasn't coming through. And yeah, I'm just so glad we had each other. And even outside of us, we had friends and family step in to help proofread it, write it. And the fact that did interviews made it really, really easy as well. So it wasn't just, it took the pressure off. It's not like school where, oh my God, if you're gonna be judged on how, I guess, intelligent or accurate you are. It just was us kind of documenting what's already out there, basically. Yeah.
Yeah, I think because we knew that, like, obviously, like, we're not as familiar with all of these different areas of social justice as people who are actively organizing or experiencing them right now. And so, like, there's 5 of us that like put the book together, but yeah, there was a bunch of people who helped edit it. When we eventually pulled it together, it was twice as long as it was supposed to be. So we tried to send that to them and they were like, no, cut this. We don't have time for that. And so we, like, did a shout out and got some friends to like chop it and like cut loads of it out and stuff. And that was really, really helpful. And to like, yeah, just kind of like make it more sort of like cohesive and all these kinds of things. And I think, yeah, by bringing in so many other people's voices, it was really one that came to actually sitting down and actually writing it. It wasn't as long as it felt because all the information was there and it was just about putting it together. And it wasn't like, obviously we have these arguments that we kind of like wanted to make within each of these chapters. But we were, yeah, it just came together somehow in the end. And I guess what I wanted to say was just that, like, yeah, just that it was hard and that there were like moments where it was like, because I also know that everyone here is like so brilliant. And so I was like, if we do it, it's going to be great. But are we doing it? And so, and this thing of, but then having to have faith in like, how do we not recreate this idea of like, we're nagging each other, we're like hassling each other, we're like, you have to like do something so that it's perfect and then present it to the rest of the group. So like, while it took a little bit of like coaxing and stuff, like we just had a shared Google Drive and all the docs on there and anyone could edit them, anyone could add stuff. And if you were stuck, we'd have a call, we'd be like, what are we trying to say here? And we'd work it all out. And so I wouldn't be able to tell you like who wrote all of the bits of this book. Do you know what I mean? At this point, it is such a collective effort that it was collective. And there was something missing. Like we didn't get to spend that much time together in person as a group all together. Like I've definitely like seen each of you individually at various points, but it's not, when we submitted this proposal, it was very much like with a vision of we're going to have all these deep chats, we're going to have dinner and we're going to have all these deep chats together, spend all this time together, maybe go on these retreats. And then it was actually a pandemic, so we just couldn't do that. So there was like this disconnection at points, but we like worked through it, and I just amazed that we actually like pulled it all together. Like, yeah.
I wanted to speak to your point on individuality and positionality as well, especially because the clout be chasing, okay? And people be chasing the clout. And the clout don't get nobody free. The clout don't get nobody out of prison. It don't feed no hungry children. The clout don't do none of that, but them followers don't. Okay. Well, we was talking about something important. I'm just kidding. The individual, my ego had to die for this to exist. I'm just be real with you. I tried. No, I'm not lying to you. I tried to write a book on abolition. I'm being for real. I tried. Oh, I studied. I got the degrees. I'm an academic. I know the stuff. Never got off the ground because I don't know about that. I don't know about this. What I want to say about this. I don't know about this. How I feel about this. Should we mention this person? What do we do about this? Oh, but this person got this history, but we really like this concept. Should we still include them in the book? all of those things as an individual will stop you. It will never happen. If I wasn't a part of a collective, it never would have happened. And the other things, the most proud thing to me is when my mom asked me about the book and she was like, "Where's your name?" It's not in there. Which one of the chapters did you write? I can't tell you one that I wrote by myself. Well, which one did you do the most? I can't tell you one. Well, which one is your work? I mean, I might be able to find you a line or two that, you know what I mean? That's pure, that might be my thought that came out onto the page, but that is the most exciting thing because like you said, Tope, like the freedom of the ideas. And also, y'all are all physically here, so y'all see what we look like. But who really knows who's in Cradle, right? So if you like the ideas, right, if it changes your life and really radicalizes you, you don't have individual people to then attach yourself to. Where I had to spend 5 years extracting myself from Angela Davis because I attached no, I'm being honest with y'all. I attached myself to her as a celebrity. I put her onto a pedestal and I looked at her. No, I'm being honest. Y'all might be giggling, but I'm serious. And so detaching ourselves from that and being able to say, no, we put something out into the world that stands alone. It doesn't have a face. It doesn't have, well, we do have a Twitter account, but you know what I mean? You know, it's not chasing any clout. There's no hashtag. So it's like, do you like the ideas? Are you trying to fight the fight? Do you want to join in the battle? Do you want to create this new world? Then read the book. It's not about us. And that's so exciting.
You okay? You okay? Yeah, we're all right. We're all right. We're all good. We're all good. It's just the speaker. It's all good. I also just wanted to dedicate a little part of this question to Hajar, to Brekna, and to Farhana. Thank you so much for like believing in this project and for encouraging us when we were close to giving up, and for putting so much effort and energy into this book. Like, we really appreciate it, and we could not have done anything like this without you.
Questions.
I have one question, which is, I think you don't make the case yet. I mean, I sense it's there, but I don't hear it yet, because that's in prison. Is for someone to be in prison, theoretically, of course, it's not happening. A lot of people in prison without all these principles are crossed. The principle is this person must pose a risk, an imminent risk, right now, system, high risk of harm, a kind of harm that's irreversible, life-threatening, and it must be immediate. Those are the threshold of prison. Okay? I don't know all of this. Okay? So,
well,
would you
yeah. No, yeah, we'll let you finish. We'll let you finish.
Those are the principles in order to sign off someone to prison. It is asked to you in the recall.
No, I understand that.
Yes. So if someone poses a life-threatening, immediate harm to someone else, right?
Right.
What is your answer to that?
Read the book, officer. But we have a response. It's okay. It's okay. Thank you, Heather. Thank you. We're okay. Yeah.
Second question, I don't ask you.
No, we'll just say the word. We just don't know how much time.
That's okay. So you are going to restrict my speaking. No, everyone. No, you don't allow me to ask the question in its full gravity, right?
Is there second part to the same? Okay, go for it.
You know, the second question is, how many people in prison in UK?
Oh, just under 80,000 in England, where we've got them.
I mean, one is obviously too much, and I never recommended prison sentence.
Okay,
Just
thank
for
you.
your
Great.
information,
That's
yeah?
great. Yeah.
You know what? A lot of people here, we want to build a world without prisons and probably get quite scared. You'll think, well, what about all the harmful things that people do, you know, all the violence, like, I don't even want to go into it. We know this is a very violent, harmful world that we live in, and people want that harm to be addressed. Like people, we don't want to, we want to be safe. We want to know that we can walk down the street and not worry about being harassed or being attacked. I want to feel like I can wear whatever I want or express myself however I want, hold the hand of whoever I want and not be attacked or hurt. But the thing is, most violence goes unaccounted. Most of the violence that takes place does not lead to people going into prison. Tony Blair, is he ever going anywhere near a prison? Most of the harm that takes place, like interpersonally, like there's so many statistics I can list off, like how many people have been sexually assaulted, how many people have been, yeah, I mean, is anyone seeing prison for that? No, and the point is prison isn't actually about addressing harm. It's about, that's why we see like the certain demographics of people being disproportionately represented. Are we saying that care leavers are the most harmful people in the world? No. And if you look into the history of the prison system and why it was created, especially in the UK, the Met Police, it's been about protecting property. It's been about, discipline and control. And what abolition does actually is to take harm seriously. It says, actually, no, putting people in a cage isn't a solution to harm and violence. And it says, actually, the line between victim and perpetrator isn't that clear. It isn't black and white. We all want to say we live in a black and white world, and we don't. And prison is a violent solution to violence. How is using more violence going to create peace? It doesn't make sense. And what we're doing is, and what the abolitionist movement does, is invite us to take harm and violence more seriously. It says actually the harm of poverty, the harm of food insecurity, that should be taken seriously as well. Yeah, I could keep going, but I feel like there are some other people who have more.
Yeah. I mean, I was just like, I mean, we could list all kinds of harms that aren't going to lead you to prison, I guess. Like, you know, we have Grenfell, we have war, we have austerity, right? Like and I think when it comes to your question of like if the majority, like we know that the majority of people who are in prison are in there for non-violent crimes. So like, and then when we look at what is labeled as violent, like so much of that violent crime is covered then by things like people assaulting a police officer while they're being arrested unjustly, and then that becomes the offense, and so you are a violent person in that situation. Or the majority of women who are imprisoned for homicide are in there for murdering the person who had been abusing them for years and years, and they had no support for that, and eventually it came down to it's me or you. It's about people being driven to extreme violence when violence happens and the conditions that lead to that. And realistically, like the police, they don't really intervene on violence. Like people do call the police maybe if there's a drunken fight outside or these kinds of things, but 2 to 3 women a week have been murdered by a current or former partner. And that statistic has not changed over decades, has only actually gone up during the pandemic. And realistically, when it comes to interventions, like, yes, so there are occasions when police will intervene on domestic violence. Someone might call the police. We know the majority of the time they take too long to get there. And like I said, like so many people are dying. Clearly, they're not doing a great job. But when it comes to things like sexual violence, people aren't calling the police to intervene on sexual violence. People aren't usually like reporting sexual violence at all. And if they do, it's often up to a year later on average that they would even go and report it. And so it's not about interventions in that case. And so when we talk about safety and policing, like those things are not really connected. And I think it's just important to like look at those, you know, if stats are what wins you over, like, you know, the Met Police, like if the conviction rate for rape has never been over like 4%, but then the regular, like, yeah, it's usually less than 2. And like, and that's for reported cases, right? And then, but then on top of that, like the conviction rate for like theft is like 6%. So like, what are they doing? Like, you know, and like if the conviction, if that solve rate for theft is about 6% or up to 10% in the Met Police, but they're stopping and searching young Black people up to 3 times on their way home from school, that like the amount of harm they're doing, the harassment that causes, because of their supposed suspicions, and like that is always like stop and search is always like, oh, there's been a theft in the area, someone like fitting your description or whatever, and like it's clearly a really bad way to solve theft, you know, like and so I really think like it's about looking at like, yeah, the ways that these systems actually operate and the reality of like what violence looks like in our communities, and like we absolutely have skills to de-escalate and intervene. Like, you know, like a mum with 5 kids or whatever is a great de-escalator, believe me. Like, you know, like there's people, or like a younger sibling with a lot of older siblings, like great at mediation often, or like finding ways to like, yeah, you know, deal with those situations. And like, we have lots of these skills by like our survival. And so actually like starting to put those into practice and like building these spaces where we can really talk about it and share skills for much better tactics for approaching these issues as well, like not having to rely on coercion or surveillance or control, and actually trying to like create systems where people want to do better because they want to be in community and they don't want to be harmful. Yeah.
Oh, a really quick point, and it's why I advocated for you to be able to finish your question. There has to be room for someone to ask the question. You might not agree with me, but I'm the one who's up here. And we said it was a manual. We said we invited people. In the introduction, we said you don't have to agree with us. We're not trying to convince you. We want to expose you. So what I'm saying is we wrote this book for you to be able to ask these questions, right? So I just want to make that clear to the room that we want this question and we want to answer the question because it's a part of how we get to a world without prison. It's talking about it. And just to your point about who goes to prison and how do we respond, I think there's a larger question about, but what about the very dangerous people? Almost everyone has the capability to be extremely dangerous. And actually, previously taking the life of another person or committing serious assault is one of the things that makes you least likely to perpetuate that level of violence against another person again. So past actions of violence are not predictive of future actions of violence. And so when we make assumptions like the prison system does, that when someone commits a violent action, that they're more likely to commit more violent actions in the future. And so we should restrict that person and keep them away from other people to protect them and others for them further perpetuating that violence. That is not in line with the facts of our society, and that we recognize that violence acts in systems and in behaviors and in ways of doing things that can replicate and move from person to person, from society to society. So we cannot prevent violence by looking at people who are committing violence and separating them from the rest of the community. And I think that's a very important point that has to be made, because the violence that happens, that so many of my Cradle collective members have mentioned, that violence is not being perpetuated by people who have previous track records of extreme levels of violence.
So if we don't recognize that we are all capable of great violence, every person in this room could take someone's life. Every person in this room could assault someone. And I'm not trying to trigger anyone, but I'm trying to be real. We all have the capability to cause harm and to be violent and to be a rapist and to be a murderer. So when we throw these terms out like they're not behaviors and actions, and we talk about them like they're character traits, that's where abolition is getting us away from. We want to talk about violence as a behavior. We want to talk about murder and assault as behaviors that we can combat in our society.
Okay, I think we have time for one final question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, you talk about abolition and joy, so I wanted to ask what brings you joy.
Okay, what brings you joy?
Can we go down the line? I want to hear everybody.
Which way? What brings me joy?
Being with the people that I love most in the world, who really care about me and really see me and constantly challenge me to like keep growing and keep changing.
I'm going to go with the obvious answer and say that these people on stage here all bring me joy.
Everyone's answer's so deep. Mine is partying.
Yeah, I was just gonna be like sharing food with people that I love. And there's something about like what you said about being seen. It's about like being able to be comfortable enough to relax and be able to let that joy in rather than like constantly feeling on guard or having to perform or these kinds of things. I think like that is when I can actually experience joy, is like when I can reach that level of comfort with people and be able to just like, yeah, be silly and, you know, all those things.
Well, I clearly mentioned sci-fi. So first and foremost, Stargate SG-1 brings me joy. My partner and my dog, which are just in the back. Turning someone else's light on, up, or revealing it to them. Like, have you ever seen somebody in the bathroom and they had on cool shoes and you was like, okay, shoes, you know? And you just saw their whole mood change. Like they were having a terrible day in the mirror and you're like, okay, shoes. And they're like, yeah, okay, I got these shoes. I love doing that. It makes me so happy. So do that when you see someone, well, not just about the shoes, but you know, if you can bring light to someone else, it's really a great way to spark joy.
Okay, I think we'll finish there. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you so much, Deborah, our BSL interpreter. Thank you so much, TJ, for handling our text. All folks were fine. And thank you all for coming. Yeah. The books are available. So if you want a copy of the book, just come and see us. It's £10. So there's the discount. What else do I need to say? Yeah. Okay, yeah. One last thing.
Okay. So, Hello. Oh, yes, this is my son. Okay. Hi, my name is Chelsea. I am of African descent. And so I wanted to do a libation in celebration of this momentous occasion and the opportunity to change the world with these incredible feminine people. And so I know everyone has like been drinking throughout the vibe. So we're just gonna pour a bit of water, but we'll just ask that you would join in with us in the libation. And so it's gonna be a call and response, and a little bit of protest chant. So does everybody have, oh, we're popping bottles. And you're welcome to, shall we give people a drink? If you don't have a drink, no. No, that's not, okay, sorry. We ask you to join in with us. You guys had drinks at the beginning, we'll have ours now. Okay.
Mum, put your hands over your ears.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Okay. It's water. Okay, I need an empty cup. I shoved the water. Oh, no, I want some water. Beautiful. Okay. So if you would repeat after me, I believe that I believe that we will I believe that we will win. 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 I believe